Let's get this rolling. So it looks like we have a quorum here. This is a Bloomington City budget hearing for the city's 2022 budget. Today is Thursday, August 26th. It is 6 p.m. I think we'll start with a roll call. We've done that the last few nights. So can we have the clerk call roll for us?
Yes, Councilmember Rallo.
Here.
Volan.
Here.
Rosenbarger.
Here.
Scambaluri.
Here.
Sims.
Here.
Thank you. Flaherty. It's Thursday. Okay. Piedmont Smith.
Here.
Smith.
I am here.
And Sandberg.
Here.
Thank you all.
Okay, I think Councilmember Flaherty has his teaching his class on Thursday, so he'll be late again. Okay, so this evening we have the following budget. Planning and Transportation will kick us off, followed by Engineering, and then the Department of Public Works, which will be Public Works Administration, Animal Control, Facilities, Fleet Maintenance, Parking Services, Sanitation, and Street. So let's go ahead and get started with Planning and Transportation. Director Scott Robinson will be here presenting. Thanks, Mr. Robinson, and you can begin when you would like. I think we have 10 minutes scheduled for you.
Great, thank you. I'll share my screen. Hold on one second, please. Can everybody see my screen?
It would help if you made it a little larger, but yes.
Hey, Scott, we see your talking points, not your slides.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
Nine minutes, 20 seconds. I'm just kidding. Okay, thanks.
All right, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Is this the correct screen? Sorry, I have too many screens open. All right, great, thank you. With that, I will get started. Good evening. My name is Scott Robinson. I'm the Director for Planning and Transportation. I appreciate you having the time this evening to hear my 2022 budget presentation. As you can see, advance the slides, why does planning and transportation exist? Our department's mission is to help protect the health, safety, general welfare of the residents, visitors, and businesses within the city of Bloomington. Guiding from the form and function of the built environment and land uses with the natural environment in order to sustain Bloomington's high quality of life. The department develops and implements plans that ensure that the growth and mobility of our community is consistent with Bloomington's values and vision towards the future. I have a little screen capture of my team here, one of our Zoom meetings, and I just want to give a shout out to them. I really appreciate all their hard work. They're an excellent staff. Little background about our department. There's 16 full-time employees. It's comprised of 3 divisions. The Planning Services Division, that's the division that develops and administers plans and studies and provides boards and commission staff support to various boards and commissions of the city. The Planning Services Division is the division that develops and administers permits and reviews, development review, also administers the UDO and also provides staff support for various boards and commissions. And the third division is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. This group coordinates regional transportation needs and leverages state and federal funding for transportation projects. And I have also listed a few major initiatives over the last few years, updating our comprehensive plan and transportation plan. We've been in the process of updating our Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO, a couple of transportation studies, a parking study and travel demand management, as well as the redevelopment of Bloomington Hospital site. The next few slides, I just want to spend a brief moment to highlight 2021 budget goals. We had 28 of those and are organized into 6 programs. The Planning Services Division is in charge of implementation and evaluation and reporting of the Planning Services Division. This graph that you see here demonstrates the status on the implementation of the transportation plan. As you can see, progress has been made, but there is more work before us. Core function of the Development Services Division provides customer service on permits, such as sign permits and building permits, code compliance, and development petitions. Another aspect of this team is also to increase commissioner knowledge. As you know, planners sometimes speak another language, right? This year, we've had 5 commissioners participate in a few training opportunities. Our citizen volunteers also need tools and resources for their time and efforts through our various planning initiatives. The next slide looks at the planning area of administering the Unified Development Ordinance. This is another core function of the department, which includes regular updates. As you all know, we have been doing this since 2018 for a major overhaul of the UDO. The 2 maps that you see here on this slide represent the before and after zoning changes reflecting plan unit developments, or PUDs, on the left. With the updated map, we rezoned 103 of 119 PUDs to standard or straight zoning. That's a big accomplishment, so I want to point that out. That helps into the administration for consistency of zoning across the city and administration of PUDs. The next budget area is Metropolitan Planning Organization. Administration is responsible for reporting lots of reports that the MPO staff provides on a regular basis. That's to help ensure that we're in good standing for federal transportation dollars. The little graph that you see here is one of the things they do annually is administer the crash report. And this gives a history of crashes throughout Monroe County since 2013 to 2019. Why is that important? It's important to help be responsive to understand where fatal and incapacitating crashes are happening throughout the county, so we can program and address various transportation improvements that will help reduce or eliminate safety issues. This reporting can also be helpful towards the comprehensive plan's Vision Zero program, a goal of 0 fatalities from crashes. The next slide, just want to highlight a couple programs on ways to improve customer service, ranging from the development review of permits that we review and issue to the various boards and commissions that we serve. There's 11 of them. Having professional staff and the tools and resources available is essential for those services. Now turning our focus towards on 2022. There are 30 budget goals in the 6 same programs. Planning services will continue with the evaluation of our plans, but we will also focus on some self-assessments on America Planning Association's housing policy and equity guides. I feel that these will be helpful tools on our self-assessment, but also working with our boards and commissions on ways we can improve on areas of equity in housing policy. This next slide, I have a picture of the recent B-line or 7-line protected bike lane installed here. And one of the goals of planning services is also to help educate and inform and engage the community. There's a lot of opportunities with this new facility in the city to help understand how to use it, how to help improve and educate various members of the community. The Development Services Division will continue to focus on the daily business of customer service, enforcement, code enforcement, and staff will continue to improve online information and public engagement opportunities. These have largely remained consistent for the last few years, but I wanted to highlight some of the new tools that we've implemented with some online interactive maps. This is a screenshot from the August 2021 Plan Commission meeting. It's hard to see at this scale, but there were 6 cases. The yellow circles highlight the various locations around the city where a user could click on those orange sites and find additional information on that. These are some tools that we're looking to continue to develop and employ through various boards and commissions for both educational purposes and for community engagement. The next program goal is dealing with the Unified Development Ordinance. Again, we've done some heavy lifting. Recently, we've just updated the zoning map, as I mentioned, but looking in 2022, there's one area of interest that we'd like to look to help facilitate and implement accessory dwelling units. As everybody is aware, this is one type of housing unit that the community provides a lot of support for. So we're looking at ways to help educate and implement this type of housing throughout Bloomington. As City Council is considering the annexation process, they are residents that will be welcomed into our community. Part of the Unified Development Ordinance in that process will necessitate the need to initiate processes to consider areas into the city and what that zoning will be, as well as updating the transportation and comprehensive plan. Moving on to the Metropolitan Planning Organization for 2022. Again, these largely remain the same with their ongoing reporting. I will like to highlight the fact that we just updated, or the nation is updating the 2020 census, which will impact various jurisdictional boundaries within the MPO. And that may have financial outcomes as well as pending transportation legislation. So I anticipate in fiscal year or calendar year 2023, there'll be some new program goals to address the changing landscape of our Metropolitan Planning Organization. But again, for 2022, we largely have the same goals. We are currently in a certification review with the state and feds right now, and that's a very important milestone to ensure that the Metropolitan Planning Organization is in good standing. We have a very good track record on that account. On the program goal of technical training and accountability, one of the things I wanted to highlight again is, in addition to the technical training and professionalism of our staff, there's a new emergent trend called the digital twin. This is a pilot that I'd like staff to consider to employ and perhaps look at some areas such as the Bloomington Hospital redevelopment site. The whole concept behind the digital twin allows an interactive forum for sharing and visualization, as well as possible build out scenarios. So this is one tool that with our current licenses with our GIS software, that's a new program that we'd like to, again, explore, and as a possibility for community engagement on how the future of Bloomington could look. And then circling back to the last program on the boards and commissions, again, our department is responsible for providing staff support for various boards and commissions. One thing new for 2022 on the same theme of providing some evaluation, I would like to get some feedback from our board and commission members on things that we're doing well and things that we could do some improvement on. So that's a new thing I'm looking to do in 2022 so that we can provide better services to our boards and commissions. Getting into the highlights, I'd like to point out that, category 1, as you're well aware by this time, is staff salaries, and the administration has made those announcements. That reflects a small increase of 2.75 in my overall budget. Category 2, office supplies, we have a very small increase. One little point that I highlighted here is considering a pilot program for some air monitoring for some tools. So that's something I'm looking to do to help provide some information and data on that data point for our community. And then category 3, it looks like a really large increase, which it is, but I want to point out that it's more historical with past years, what had happened in prior 2020 and 2021. We had existing contracts with the UDO update and other consultants that we're working on. And then with the wrap up of those studies, I'm seeking for additional increases in category 3 to address the accessory dwelling units that I mentioned, to address the needs for the annexation process, to update our transportation plan, comprehensive plan, and zoning map. And then lastly, to look at a corridor study within the transportation plan. The last slide here is just an overall summary of the previous slide in a table format. Again, you can see that there's a 24% increase in our department's budget from this year to next year. To wrap things up, the 2022 budget just reflects our program goals that align well with the theme on implementation and evaluation of our plans and studies, looking to improve our customer service and administration of our various the codes that we deal with, providing the technical training for our staff to be professional and qualified, and then leveraging the coordination with our MPO partners for federal funding to help implement various transportation projects. So I appreciate your consideration tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I will stop my screen.
Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Robinson. We will start with questions from council members and just follow the process from the last 3 nights, 3 minutes per council member per round, and we'll just do as many rounds as are necessary. Okay, so it looks like we have a question from, I'm gonna go in a different order, council member Scambolari.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I appreciate your pointing to the census as something that guides the amount of funding we need. Could you go into more detail about that? Because I know that several of us are concerned about what we perceive to be a pretty dramatic undercount. Could you talk about some specific ways in which that could play out?
Well, I haven't seen the data yet, and I don't know. I mean, historically, university and college towns do have undercount problems or issues. With the Metropolitan Planning Organization, specifically speaking, there's a planning area and then there's an urbanized area. The planning area allows the MPO to study transportation needs. And so that area is a little bit larger than the urbanized area. Technically speaking, for our MPO, we call the entire county our planning area. So when we do our transportation plan through the MPO, it looks at the entire county. That won't have much impact on the funding. That's just a core function of planning in that group. When you get into the urbanized area, that's where the calculations come down on population and census tracts and funding formulas. So we anticipate that the urbanized area will change and probably grow. We also anticipate with pending transportation bills and stimulus that there might be additional money available for various MPOs. So I think, you know, our guess is that regardless of the count, we anticipate that the urbanized area will increase, and we will expect some increase in funding. But it's too early to tell. Last time in 2010, that process took about 2.5 years to kind of shake itself out with the map and the steps that we need to do with that.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Councilmember?
Yeah, it does. I was going to ask as well about timetable, and you covered that. I also, in the minute I have left, you're mentioning the self-evaluation that you have planned for the Planning for Equity policy guide. Could you talk more about the methodology for that? Is that an external reviewer coming in? Is that something we just do internally? Is there a guide for it? How will that work?
So there's a couple of guides, one on the housing policy and one on equity. They were documents available on the American Planning Association's website. First step is I would conduct a self-evaluation with our staff, looking at those policies and evaluating that. The second step, I would have a peer review. You know, that would be our boards and commissions saying, hey, here are these guides, here's what we think, what do you think? And then the third step is, again, I would seek feedback from those boards and commission members on, areas that we could improve upon, or areas that we're doing well. So no, it wouldn't be an external consultant coming in to facilitate that, but it is a tool that I think would be helpful, given the framework that those policy guides, we can also compare into our comprehensive plan and other things that we're doing. And then again, have our boards and commissions kind of evaluate how we do our self-evaluation. So that's what I would anticipate with that. And certainly open to other ideas on that. Yeah.
And I'm over time, so I'm going to hold off on any other questions for now. Thanks.
Okay, next we'll have Council Member Rallo, followed by Council Member Piedmont-Smith.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Robinson, for your presentation. I think we've got an ugly building epidemic in our country, and I don't think that Bloomington's immune to this. It seems to me, with rare exceptions, I'm disappointed by what I'm seeing built. And I wondered what you felt we could do to remedy this. I know that we pay attention to scale, mixed materials. We try to break up facades and things like that. But it doesn't seem to be entirely helping matters. So I wondered, and by the time it comes to council, it's generally too late, and we're seeing less PUDs anyway. So what do you think we can do? Code restrictions of some kind? Can we have, an architectural review board? Do we need to hire a city architect? What would you suggest?
Well, the UDO does have design standards that are in there. And so we could look at how could we adjust those. That would be first step. Second step, we do have an architect on retainer from the prior prior contract that we have them. So I still have a little bit of money left to leverage their third-party review. That's actually specified in the Unified Development Ordinance. So we have done that on a couple of projects. The idea of design review and committee, I don't know if that's a successful tool. I think that's something that we could certainly explore. I do think that there's a balance on building materials and affordability and quality of building materials. So certainly that's an issue that I think we look at the materials. Is it sustainable? Is it good quality, long lasting? But then, is it architecturally pleasing? And so sometimes we could have great materials, but architecturally, we didn't end up something that people like. So I think there's obviously opportunity to look for ways to improve that. But we do have some tools right now that we can try to work on that.
I have a little time remaining. What about having an architect on staff instead of just on retainer? Somebody who would bear responsibility if something were to come forward and we were to say, this is really disappointing. You know what I mean? It just seems to me that it's when it's the process right now doesn't seem to be working very well. So what's your feeling about one on staff?
I think the process that we have is still fairly new. So I would like some more time to assess how the community feels by that. I honestly feel that architecture is very personal. Some people find one building looks great and other people don't. So if I had some more direction on the types of things that people are concerned about, that would be more helpful than hiring an architect per se. So as much as I think it would be great to have a person on staff, I do think that person would be under the same scrutiny that anybody would be reviewing the architecture of a building. It does get to be kind of personal. Right now, I think we have an okay system, but certainly open to ideas on ways we can improve that. Thank you for your question, Councilmember Rowell.
Thank you.
Councilmember Piedmont-Smith, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Robinson. I wanted to ask about housing and our housing plan, as I've been asking all week in various contexts. So in your list of goals in your memo under Planning Services Division, you have facilitate for community-based discussions on the APA's housing policy guide by Q4, which may be used towards an in-depth local housing study. So I wonder if you could weigh in on putting that in context. We had a housing study in 2020. What our comprehensive plan calls for is a strategic housing plan or a housing strategy, which is, goes beyond a study and goes into, well, who's going to do what when. Since you mentioned this APA planning guide, I wonder, how do you view our housing plan and housing strategy?
I think what the APA policy guide is again, a way to kind of check what our policies that we have in place to see if it is meeting those community goals. Yes, we do have a housing strategy, and I think that's a useful tool to move forward with. Again, I think this is just an evaluation of looking at what we have in place now and what we need to do more and facilitate those discussions. With the recent update of the Unified Development Ordinance, there was a lot of interest about accessory dwelling units. And so that's just one example of a housing policy, maybe a strategy, depending on how you look at it, is how can we encourage more of that type of housing? What kind of barriers there are? How can we reduce those barriers? That's likely a policy within the housing guide that talks about what kind of housing policies do you have in place that either hinder or help, those types of housing. So again, I would just use that as a guide, as like a check and balance to look at how we are doing and what we have in place, and not as a strategy to say, hey, you got to go do A, B, or C. It's just an evaluation tool. Does that make sense, Councilmember?
Yes. So in your professional opinion, do you think we have a sufficient housing strategy in the city?
I think up to this point, with the ROI studies that we've done, we have some really good information as a starting point and a baseline. Now, certainly moving in the future, there's some unknowns that we'll need to continue to dig deeper in. But at this point, I think we have a pretty good understanding of needs. And I think the challenge is looking at how do we address those needs.
Okay, so the comprehensive plan does call for a housing strategy. So I'm just trying to gauge whether we have it or not. Thank you.
I feel like the current study is a really good start on that strategy, and we can build upon that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. Thank you for the report or your presentation, Mr. Robinson. To help my vernacular a little bit, planning and transportation, under line 243 under tools, and these are air monitors, the acronyms PM, BOC, and NO2. Just to help my understanding, what are we talking about there, and what are they?
I apologize.
What are they monitoring? No, you're fine.
Councilmember Sims, I apologize that. This is so the acronyms are of chemistry. So NO, actually NO2 is nitrous oxide.
Gotcha.
And PM1, it actually goes from PM1 through PM10, particulate matter 1.0 through 10.0. And what was the third one? I don't have my presentation pulled up right now.
VOC, B is
it's volatile organic compounds, or VOC. So things like benzene and those kind of off gases from petroleum. So there's some really small, pretty nifty little devices, air monitoring devices that I'm looking to deploy through volunteers, perhaps, to collect these type of data around our community. And so that's just an example of trying to be creative on how we can get some information. I do know that Bloomington doesn't have, I think only has one air monitoring station from the state. It monitors, I believe, PM 2.5, that's particulate matter 2.5. And it's on the east side of the community over by Bedford Rogers. So again, it's just a way to kind of look at some of the other issues as the community is looking at, air quality and quality of life. I thought it would be a nice, relatively inexpensive tool to explore.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to hear later how and what it is you monitor or come up with during that. In the minute that I have left, You also mentioned, or I saw on one of your charts, the annexation zoning allocation of about $151,000. Is that what I think it is, that you pre-zoned or planning what areas may be in a certain zone if should they be annexed? Am I close?
Yeah, so there's a couple legal pieces that move down depending on what decision council makes on annexation. So the first step would be we'd have to incorporate those areas into our comprehensive plan. Now the county has done their comprehensive plan and fringe plans, and so part of that process there'd be, an engagement in working with those new members of our community to bring that into our transportation and comprehensive plan. The second piece is zoning. So those areas that are incorporated into the community, we'd have to update our zoning map. And so again, there might not be a perfect match for some of those areas that get annexed.
Mr. Robinson, I'm sorry. No, thank you. We run out of time.
Okay.
Maybe we can pick that up either later today or later. So thank you.
All right. Thanks for the question, Councilmember Sims.
I was just sort of letting Mr. Robinson finish answering if someone has asked. But if you all want me to be a little stricter on that 3 minutes.
Go ahead and finish, Mr. Robinson. Thank you, Ms. Chair.
Okay.
No, it's not about stress, just being respectful. So thank you for that.
I'll try to be brief.
You were to the zoning part, yeah.
Yeah, and I know planners have our language, so I'm trying to stop talking plain English. So again, legally speaking, there's areas that may be annexed that we have to match up with our zoning districts. And so depending on what that looks like, which we don't know, there might be some good matches for which zoning districts, or we might have to bring over some county districts into ours or create a new one. So that's just, starting to build that process and understand what those expectations will be in timeline. So that's kind of the initial step in 2022 that we're looking to do, is just to initiate and start doing that assessment.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Councilmember Rosenberg.
You're welcome. Other first round questions? Councilmember Smith?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I'm looking at, let's see if I can, I don't know if I can do this. I was looking at the last page from the binder, and it's the one with your budget items on it in the blue line. It doesn't work, does it? Well, okay. So I'm going to ask you under total personnel services and under supplies, there's some increases in uniform and tools, 265%, telephone 337%, travel 280, and other services and charges 428%. Can you kind of just walk me through a little bit what that means to me and what that means in your budget?
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember Smith. I'll try to hit each one of those. So the tools, we already talked about that. That was the question that Councilmember Sims asked. It's the air monitoring tools. That's the increase. Cell phones. Pre-pandemic, most of my staff did not have cell phones. So we work with the public on a regular basis. In the remote environment, we had to pivot pretty drastically to deal with that. So now most of my staff have city cell phones. So that's where that increase is coming from. Travel, pre-pandemic, training for certification, education, and other things that for our professional staff. I'm just trying to return that to pre-pandemic levels. So that's why you see a big increase on both travel and instruction. Because again, with the pandemic, we lowered those pretty substantially in 2021. And then other services and charges, again, that's kind of a reflection of two things: pandemic, number one, and two, we had current processes going on with the hospital redevelopment that wasn't funded out of our department, but we had staff involved in that, and the Unified Development Ordinance. And so we had contracts with those with outside consultants. So we didn't need additional money last year, but those processes have wrapped up, and now I'm seeking the additional services. And I talked about those with the ADU studies or the ADUs, annexation, and the transportation plan. So that's why you see a very large increase in that budget line. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. I really appreciate your explanation. Since we're looking at the budget, I look at those numbers and just wondered what that meant. So then the follow-up question for me is, it looks like your overall budget increases about 24%. And based on, some of those explanations, I get that. Will your budget return down, decrease back down after we get through this? Are these one-time charges, and or is there any ARPA money that you can use for a one-time charge?
So ARPA money, we already leveraged ARPA money for other improvements through ITS. And so they actually covered some of the cell phone costs, but this is to sustain those annual fees for that. The other items, the travel, that's travel and instruction, that's kind of a historical level that we try to maintain for our staff. Some of the things that I highlighted with software, we're getting some more technical software, and I would like them to have the tools to be able to get the education and training to use those more readily. So the GIS is one I didn't have time to talk about, is a community development software program. The pandemic's kind of delayed the launch of that, but that allows for online permitting and reviewing and collaboration for permits and development review. So that's something we're really excited about, and hopefully will launch in early 2022. But that software has some training. So again, I'm trying to return some of that education and training for my staff so that they have the tools and skills to be able to do their jobs. And then the consultant budget, the other services and charges, there's a baseline in there that covers software licenses and other things that we do. And so some of the consultant budgets, it kind of ebbs and flows from one year to the other. If you kind of look back prior years, it's somewhat very similar to what we've had in years past with other efforts. So it's hard for me to estimate if that would go up and down in 2023.
Fair enough. Thank you, Ms. Robinson.
I will add one caveat to that,
Yes, sir.
since I had a little bit of time. I mentioned the MPO and their process. When that time comes, there might be a need to seek additional sources for them to update some of their plans and their transportation model, which is a very technical thing. So that would be one I would anticipate a year or two out, but it's still too early to know that scope right now.
Thank you for your answers. And sorry, next question.
Thank you. Other first round questions? I will ask one. Thank you for your presentation again, Mr. Robinson. Mine is about the transportation plan. As everyone knows, we adopted that in 2019, and one of the recommendations is an immediate corridor studies of the major east, west, and north-south corridors. So College Walnut and Atwater Third are, and I'm sorry if I missed it in the presentation, do we plan to conduct those studies in 2022?
Short answer is yes. That's part of the budget request, is to have consultant money to facilitate a corridor study. The area that we're looking at is College Walnut, but it's certainly open for discussion on priorities of other areas. The reason why I suggest College Walnut is there's more right of way. That's the amount of land that the city owns. So there's more travel lanes and there's more room to work with. When you look at Third, Atwater and Third, it's a little bit more constrained with available right of way, especially on Atwater. There have been prior studies done along there, and it's just been a very challenging area. That doesn't mean we can't pursue that. I just think I think the College Walnut corridor will offer us more opportunities to consider. That's my preference, but again, I'm open to suggestions and feedback on that.
Thanks. How much does it cost? Just, I don't know, ballpark for one study.
And that's up for debate. Again, how complicated and how in depth we get. Andrew Seaborg, who will come up later, he worked in North Carolina, I believe, for a few years, and they did a comparable study. And so I think, their estimate, they said anywhere from about 150 to 250,000. So we're kind of in that middle zone right there with this. But it kind of depends on the complexity and how big it is with the study on that.
Okay, and just, I mean, one more point on this. The transportation plan doesn't say pick one, so I'm just asking, why are we just picking one?
Well, I would say the simple answer is pace, timing and funding. I mean, if there's concern about implementation, if we do a study, there will be recommendations about improvements, and those improvements cost money. And there's certainly limited resources on implementing those improvements. So absolutely, the plan does identify several options to consider. That's a recommendation that I would like to move forward with, but certainly open to other ideas on that.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Bowen has his hand up, and then Councilmember Flaherty will be after him.
Thanks. To follow up on that question, it seems to me that the bottleneck isn't dollars, it's staff. In other words, is the reason that you can't do 2 corridor studies because they require coordination by our own staff, or is it all purely a matter of hiring consultants?
No, so hiring consultants still takes a lot of work with staff,
right?
In coordination with that. So it's not an issue of staff. There's also a level of expertise. So consultants do bring in some expertise. Consultants also bring in an unbiased position, whether.
No. I think you're misunderstanding my question. I'm asking, is the reason that you couldn't do both major corridor studies because of a limitation of our own staff? Or do you have the bandwidth to handle 2?
I would not have the bandwidth to do 2 because our staff is busy with the day-to-day business, the day-to-day stuff that they do with boards and commissions, permit review, and the things that they do. And so I'd be concerned about trying to initiate 2 pretty substantial corridor studies that I think the community would be pretty interested in. And so I think probably the appropriate level for this scale of a project would be 1. And keep in mind, they're still working on implementation of the neighborhood greenways and traffic calming and other things that are consistent with the transportation plan. So they are doing other things, but when you're looking at a larger community-wide study, I would only be
very
comfortable
good
doing 1. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for the clarification, Councilmember Sims.
Councilmember Flaherty, I would also just like to say if I say an order like 1 and then 2, I'm okay with the next person just going ahead. Okay.
Thank you, Chair Rosenberger. And apologies again to my colleagues and to you, Mr. Robinson, for showing up late this evening. I had a conflict until about 6:30. So I'll be sure to go back and watch the first half hour of this presentation. But I wanted to follow up in the same vein of what was just being discussed. I appreciated the previous meeting with you and the mayor about corridor studies in particular. I think I also favor going ahead and pursuing both, since I feel like that's what the plan calls for. But if we're choosing, I understand the reasons you outlined around Walnut and College having sort of more flexibility in the context of the right of way, but Third and Atwater, those constraints that have been mentioned in terms of lesser right of way are, and perhaps, on the edge of campus, some things like that, those constraints aren't going away. And I would imagine we're still going to pursue a corridor study on that street, even if it's next year, let's say, or next budget year after this one. And I have much greater concern about the safety on 3rd Street for pedestrians in particular and cyclists than I do on Walnut or College. So since, again, if we're picking, and since the constraints aren't changing with either of those cases, what do you think about the idea of pursuing 3rd and Atwater first? Because it's a more pressing safety issue. We've had actually multiple pedestrian deaths on that street in the last couple of years, quite sadly. And yeah, there's just long stretches on Atwater that are designed for a drive speed of 40 miles an hour and have 0 stops, So what do you think about the safety factor weighing into the department's priorities on this?
Oh, I think safety is a very high priority, and that's something we can consider looking at. I think there's a range of priorities of looking at safety, opportunities to improve multimodal transportation, opportunities to enhance transit. I think we can look at all those variables in picking one over the other. Again, I think that my assessment is based on what I think would offer more opportunities to address some of those. But if you look at safety in the recent crash history, you're correct. There's been an unfortunate pattern along 3rd Street in recent years. Again, I think looking at the scope and scale and the amount of funding, we'll have to take a look at that corridor or both corridors and see what we can get out of there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we are on second round questions. Councilmember Rallo, followed by Councilmember Piedmont-Smith.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, I'm concerned about our housing stock consisting mostly of rental units and only about 35% owner-occupied dwellings. We heard from Mr. Zodi last evening in hand that he feels that owner occupancy is important. And there are ways to address this. One is to make sure that we have the housing stock to permit people to have that option. And then there's financing and so forth. First of all, is your department committed to that priority as well, owner occupancy as a goal? And if so, what would you do in terms of encouraging that?
So first answer is, Councilmember Rallo, is yes, we support more opportunities for home ownership. That's, again, I referenced the ADA, not ADA, American Planning Association Housing Policy Guide. And so there's certainly lots of information out there that home ownership is a really important aspect. And so we would support that. Given the confines of legal constraints, there's very little that zoning and planning can do to regulate ownership. In fact, it's forbidden by federal law. So
I'm talking about incentives.
So there are, well, again, we have to be very careful on what kind of incentives we're offering through planning and zoning. Now, collaborating with HAND and other departments, there's certainly programs and things that we can explore to help those attain home ownership. I mentioned the accessory dwelling units as one possible means. Now, that could be a stepping stone for some, not everyone, as a pathway towards home ownership. And so that's one of the reasons why I had highlighted that as a possible priority for 2022 to implement or to help implement more accessory dwelling units in Bloomington, to understand what the barriers are, what we could do to help those. And it could be a pathway for some towards home ownership. So again, I would agree wholeheartedly. We would need to do everything we can to increase home ownership.
So when you get a development proposal, do you need certain tools at your disposal that we could think about to encourage a developer to use some incentives to incentives to effectuate this sort of owner-occupied dwellings instead of apartments? Is that being done at all? Are you doing that at all?
There's no way that we can regulate, and I'll have to double check with my legal staff, but there's no way that we could legally offer an incentive to do that. It violates fair housing laws, and you start getting into very complicated ways to regulate developers. Now, we have incentives for affordability and for sustainability. I'm not aware of any that deal with ownership, but that's something that we can look into. But again, I would be very cautious about running into some legal issues on incentives that would offer ownership opportunities.
Councilmember Piedmont-Smith.
Yes, I wanted to also go back to the transportation plan. Another initiative that was prioritized in that plan is to turn Kirkwood Avenue or part of it into a shared street. And of course, with the pandemic and the street closures that we've seen, people have kind of gotten used to this idea that Kirkwood is not just for driving on. But I didn't see in your memo any mention of pursuing that goal in the transportation plan. Could you speak to that, please?
Thanks, Councilmember Piedmont Smith. No, I did not mention that. And again, I think kind of circling back to Councilmember Mullins' question about could we do one or more? Our recommendation would be one corridor study. And in regards to Kirkwood, I think the pilot program is working great. This is something that the transportation plan and other studies we've encouraged to consider. But I also think that with the recent investments there, it might be a good opportunity to pause and see how that moves forward with that corridor. I think there's some concerns and sensitivity to the businesses that if we were to initiate a study that would trigger more changes in construction and what have you in that area, I would be concerned about the sensitivity of those businesses along there. I'd personally like to see this pilot program flourish a little bit longer, because I do think it's really opened people's eyes on the opportunities available by running that. And again, the community, or the city, has made some significant investments on corridor on Kirkwood with the bollards and other improvements on there. So with that said, I would say it's still in the mix, but that would not be my priority at this time. And largely that's more of a pace and timing thing, and not it's not the right project.
Weren't the street closures actually initiated by business owners on Kirkwood? So I'm a little surprised to hear you talk about concerns of businesses.
I'm saying that if there were some businesses now, I believe not all businesses were supportive of full closure there. And again, with construction, depending on what comes out of a study, there could be some concerns about construction and further disruption with those businesses there. I do think some of our restaurants are living on a thread right now. There's some emergent trends that the pandemic has accelerated. And I think the restaurants in particular, which the outdoor seating benefits the most along there. And there are other trends with more traditional stores too that the pandemic has accelerated. So I'm just suggesting that next year is not the right time, in my opinion, but I'm certainly open to thoughts and ideas on that.
Thank you.
Other second round questions? Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, thank you. I just had a short one. Does the Planning and Transportation Department ever spend money on signal interchanges, Mr. Robinson, from the funds in your team's budget?
Not in the 2021 or 22 budget, no.
Okay. Do you know what department is in charge of ADA compliance and accessibility when it comes to signal interchanges?
Well, it depends, I guess. If it's a new signal that's installed, the engineering department would be facilitating the design of that and implementing that. Once they're accepted, then it would transfer over to the Public Works Department, Street Department on those.
So, thank you. What about retrofits? What about? I think I would imagine that all new interchanges were sort of got the latest technology and make sure we're doing things right, but we have a lot that are not compliant in town, and I'm trying to figure out more about what the replacement timeline is and what the barriers are, because it's a life or death matter for visually impaired folks crossing streets where there's no audio signal or other issues like that, where they're relying on literally using their ears to listen for traffic and walking into the street. So I think I find it to be a pretty pressing issue, and I'm just trying to learn more about that because I know it impacts multiple departments. But it sounds like not planning at all. I mean, any of the planning around how to address those existing gaps, does that come from the planning department or not at all?
Well, planning department, thanks for the question, Councilmember Flaherty. We coordinate regularly with engineering and public works on various needs around the community, as well as ADA compliance with the staff and legal department. So the answer is yes, we coordinate and we understand that. I'm not 100% sure about, when you talk about retrofitting and ADA compliance, technically, new facilities have to meet the current standards. I don't know what, older infrastructure, what that threshold is. There's certain things that they have to do that trigger upgrades. So I don't know the technical part of that. I do know that when we look at intersections and other improvements, part of the discussion is trying to prioritize those intersections that have higher levels of pedestrian activity. The signals are near or at the end of their useful functionalness, functional lifespan. And so those are things that we do consider that. And, there is limited resources on availability to improve intersections. But I think maybe, those might be better questions to discuss the following department heads after me, but we do coordinate regularly on those sort of items.
Thank you. I figured it impacted all of you. So thank you.
Other second round questions from council members? I'll ask one. Council member Camberlary.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. This is a question that some of us posed in our budget document to the administration. And I wasn't in a meeting with you, so I'm not sure if it got answered. Does the city expect to be able to fully implement the transportation plan high priority bicycle network within the specified 6-year timeframe? If not, what's the expected timeframe?
Well, there'll be a meeting scheduled by staff, I believe on November 17th, that will start sharing some evaluation of the comprehensive plan metrics as well as the transportation plan metrics. I believe on the second or third slide, I provided a quick snapshot of the transportation plan implementation, and there were 3 bars that were kind of below 50%. So yeah, there's more work to do. I will say that both the comprehensive plan and transportation plan are ambitious. The goal plan should be ambitious. I like to point to, when JFK wanted to put somebody on the moon, that's a pretty ambitious goal. I don't think they met their timeline, but they did it. So again, I think it's okay to be ambitious and hold ourselves to aggressive timelines, and we need to pursue that. So I don't have an answer for you. Is 6 years or 7 years the right timeline? I do know that there's an expectation that there might be, with this infrastructure bill coming forward and the MPO I talked about, there might be some available funding in the future. So that plays into the mix. But speaking on other council members' questions on traffic signals and other things, I think it's a balancing act of how many priorities we want to pursue.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would follow up by saying, I'm pretty sure the landing on the moon was meant to be done in this decade, and it was, so they did it. Next question from Councilmember Camberlary.
Yes, thank you. During the discussions around the UDO, I asked about planned unit developments, PUDs, and the work being done now around potential annexation has gotten me thinking about that again. Good job on all the cleanup work that was done with PUDs. I'm one of the 5, I live in one of the 5 remaining PUDs in town. But I'm wondering, are we becoming PUD averse? Is that an option we want to use less going forward? Does the annexation of different areas change that? Could you just comment on your thoughts on how we need to be using that option going forward?
Thank you, Councilmember Camberlary. Yes, we're not PUD adverse. If you look at best practices and opportunities to update your code, there's best practices out there. One of the things that might be a red flag is how many PUDs you have in the book. We had a lot, 119. A lot of them were very old, and some of them weren't technically legal anymore. So that's to say we're PUD adverse is not accurate. PUDs, if you look at our current UDO, they're supposed to be truly unique and special. And what I think has happened, to be frank, in the past is people saw PUDs as a way to not meet the standards and negotiate their way out of trying to meet development standards. And create something that might be a little bit unique. I can't say that's true for, that's not true for all the PUDs, but I think that's created an expectation of ways to get out of the UDO. So I'm hopeful that, the UDO is not that old right now. I want to be able to evaluate how it's doing and the standards we're looking at. We can tweak the standards. But PUDs also are time consuming to administer. Most of the PUDs that council continues to see are existing ones that people continually amend time and time again. It's not a fresh new PUD. There's only a very few that have come forward, largely because there isn't a lot of vacant land left in the community. The land that is vacant was already zoned PUD. Question on the county, I don't have a good idea because I have no idea what will be annexed. We'll follow a similar process that we did with the city, where assessing the status of their PUDs and what have you. But to say that we're PUD adverse, I don't think is an accurate statement. That's certainly an option on the table. We can make it harder or easier for PUDs, and that would take a change to the current standards right now.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, Councilmember Piedmont Smith, followed by Rallo, followed by Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about your report. It was mentioned in your memo that one of your goals is to respond to the vast majority of your reports in a timely manner. The community seems to have a love-hate relationship with your reports. Sometimes they work well, sometimes they're extremely frustrating. Can you talk about the most frequent ones your department deals with, and whether it points to maybe some room for improvement, either in policy or in enforcement mechanisms?
Oh, great, Councilmember Piedmont Smith. I wish I knew that answer off the top of my head on the types of complaints. I'm just going to guess, but I'd prefer to maybe get back to you on that one. A large majority are probably fences, parking on the grass, and then planning. Sometimes we just get a lot because people don't know which department to tag. So unfortunately, some of the U reports kind of get bounced around from department to department. But those are the ones that kind of come to mind, are those two. We typically don't get too many more, but I really need to check with my enforcement team to see if they can do an assessment on, the top 2 or 3.
Well, we last summer, we passed some legislation to tighten up the regulations on leaving sidewalks open when construction happens. Do you know whether the regulations have been effective? Have there been fewer complaints about walkarounds in construction zones?
That would be something that you'd have to hold off on until the engineering department. They're responsible for code enforcement in the right of way, not planning and transportation. We look at on-site code enforcement issues.
Okay, thank you.
Is it my turn? Mr. Robinson, so I'm still struggling with this disconnect between your department agreeing that owner occupancy is an important goal and what tools, if any, are available to us, which seem to be scant or none. I was intrigued by Councilmember Scambaluri's question about PUDs, because PUDs require a demonstrable public good that allows the council to have some negotiating leverage. And that this could be employed for owner occupancy, in the sense that I understand the legal hurdles for owner occupancy, but we could encourage certain structures. So we could encourage, obviously multifamily, a large multifamily apartment building are going to be rentals, but condominiums could be part of the mix, or single family homes could be part of the mix. So are PUDs useful for perhaps finding ways to incentivize owner occupancy just in terms of structure?
Thanks for your question, Councilmember Rallo. Again, I'm fairly confident that we would be forbidden by law to regulate ownership. We cannot.
I'm not talking about
Even if you
ownership, I'm
say
talking about the structure itself.
I'm not
Yeah.
finishing answering my question, please.
Yeah.
The structure shouldn't matter. If you're talking about ownership, if it's an apartment or a condo or a house or an ADU, we can regulate the ownership of one unit of the ADU. But when you start getting into requiring a condominium, there's nothing that we can legally do that says that it has to be owner occupied.
Yes, I understand.
And it's the same thing with a house. You can't legally require it to be owner occupied. They can rent it. So as much as we can try
Yes.
to
I understand
manage
that.
or dictate the type of structure, we still can't regulate the ownership.
I understand.
And
that. But we could encourage those structures which are more than likely to be rental, to be owner occupied, as opposed to a large apartment building which can't be owned by the individual, one's apartment.
Yeah, again, I don't know if you could legally require an apartment building to be condoized, but again, I'd have to look into the legal aspects of that if that's what you're talking about.
All right, I think we've exhausted that. Thank you.
I wish I had an answer for you, but I really believe that there's some pretty strict laws on.
No, I think we're in agreement about those laws. I guess what I'm saying is that the type of structure might allow owner occupancy. And I know that we can't go on that basis, but having housing diversity is the important thing here. And PUDs seem to allow that. So, or encourage it.
Thank you. Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on a thread that you mentioned, Mr. Robinson, about federal funding opportunities, and particularly in the context of potential infrastructure investments. Intuitively for me, and we've talked about this a few times, it would seem that having conducted things like corridor studies of Third and Atwater, College and Walnut, and perhaps design charrette about the shared street recommendation from the transportation plan with Kirkwood, even if we don't have the money or funds to implement all three of those things starting next year or late, or say 2023, having those studies ready and completed so that we know where we want to go would be strategically advantageous if federal funds become available. But I guess I want to know, A, is that accurate? And B, I guess I feel like I've heard from you that it doesn't quite work that way. So I'm trying to figure out how it does work. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councilmember Flaherty. I'm saying it's not possible. I just think it's challenging. My experience with the last stimulus package back in 2008, I believe, it was very difficult to meet the regulations to leverage those transportation funds for that type of project. So typically, when you look at a study, the next step would be, okay, we need to do surveying and engineering designs, and that takes time. And then that may or may not include property acquisition, and that can be very lengthy. And so often what happens with stimulus money is there's a very short window that you have to leverage that, activate it to put it into place. So best case scenario, if you had and you're talking about pretty large projects here, I'm not sure we could have something quote unquote ready to go in the window that we're talking about. Now with the MPO and future funding there's certainly opportunities to look at that. I would like to point out that we're currently engineering in the city is currently looking at the hospital redevelopment. We have some efforts underway there. There might be some projects in there that would be could be eligible, and what that would do is maybe free up one pot of money locally that we could put towards other projects. But to kind of have a pre-built plan or studies ready to go for stimulus, I'm not sure that would be the best course of action right now. Given the time and money that we need to have to do that.
Is it because we need to be several steps further down the line that we need to basically have designs, full engineering studies and designs ready to go to typically access stimulus money like that in your experience?
Yes, typically you have to have it pretty much ready to bid or close to bid. And then typically those projects that are in the pipeline right now, we've already have secured the funding. So again, in the past, you couldn't really trade one for another. There had to be a there were some steps you had to go through to do that. So it's pretty challenging to kind of find those projects, you know, to do. But I don't want to take it off the table. It's not impossible, but that's just my experience.
Thank you.
Councilmember Volan, did I see your hand? No. Other questions? Muted myself while I was talking. I think we can now go to the public, see if there's anyone who wants to comment on the planning and transportation plan budget. I think Mr. Lucas will explain how to do so.
Yes, and I see a few hands raised already. For members of the public that would wish to comment, you can indicate your desire to do so by using the raise hand function. Depending on the device you're on, you may need to click the reactions button to find that. Some folks may need to click the participants button, and that pulls up a sidebar where you will find the raise hand option. For some mobile users, it may be under the more button. And I believe if you've called in via telephone, you can dial *9. And if all of that fails you and you're able to send a message via chat to let us know you'd like to comment, we can recognize you that way. And first up, excuse me, Councilmember Rosenbarger, I don't know if you had a time limit for commenters.
Oh, yes, we've been doing 2 minutes.
Thank you. And first, I believe, is Deborah Meyerson, who should now be able to comment.
Thank you. I appreciate Mr. Robinson's presentation and the council members' questions. I'm going to try and pack in a few different comments in a short amount of time. One is I appreciate Council Member Piedmont Smith about the housing strategy to different departments. I just wanted to note that while certainly the UDO represents what the city can do with land, multiple components across frankly, where different departments are. Am I phrasing? Okay.
You did cut out for a second, yes.
Okay, I'll try and monitor that. Anyway, just giving, for example, you know, the various studies that have been done. ROI is focusing on workforce housing. The RDG housing study for the city has a lot of great data, but doesn't explore as deeply into policy. What the hand department does deals with subsidy, whereas what the UDO is more to support supply. So a housing strategy is going to help bring these different components together, certainly drawing on existing documents, but and even to identify where gaps may still exist. We've got the Heading Home Plan dealing with homelessness. Again, a lot of different great documents, but we need a way to look for consistency. Comment 2 about complete streets. That's something that has been brought up in previous plans. Both the comprehensive plan and the Bloomington transportation plan both have commitments to a complete streets policy. The Bloomington MPO does have a complete streets policy. The city of Bloomington does not. And a complete streets policy is one that ensures or works for policies to make streets for everyone, designed and operated to enable safe access for all users. And certainly the corridor studies that we're talking about will help promote that as well. I think the complete streets policy is an important thing not to lose sight of, and want to encourage that as part of this coming budget year. And then 2 more points. This is kind of complete streets related.
Mrs. Meyerson, I'm sorry, you're at the end of your 2 minutes.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, next commenter.
Next up is Greg Alexander.
Hello,
Welcome,
thanks.
Greg.
Sorry. My name is Greg Alexander. With only a few exceptions, I have seen a ton of really great work from the Planning and Transportation Department. I couldn't possibly cover all of it, but just to pick the tiniest example, air quality at my house is awful because the road in front of it. And you see tonight, they are working to monitor and report on that. That's awesome. I have one request, which echoes a request from council members over the years. I wish there would be more regular and more straightforward reports about our current status and about our progress on transportation goals. I really have to emphasize this is an incredibly difficult request. The obvious staff work of visiting old plans and developing and evaluating metrics is significant, but that's only one part of the challenge. The hardest part is that an honest report will be critical. Sometimes plans are handicapped by decisions or oversights within other departments such as engineering, public works, or parks and rec. Interdepartmental coordination is hard, and airing those tensions in public is even harder, but consciously directed change requires accountability and transparency. It's even harder than that, though, because an honest report on pedestrian transportation must necessarily criticize electeds, such as the mayor and you all. The core fact that needs to be acknowledged is that the most basic requirement, sidewalks, aren't even being funded, while these departments are being given a mandate to somehow implement progressive excellence without even enough funding for the basics. There should be no shame in admitting the fact that we are finding change to be difficult. The last 70 years of auto-centered development actually happened. Our good intentions today will not erase the consequences of that past. The material problem of improving our infrastructure is huge. In order to make headway, we need all of the roles to be filled, including the role of oversight. Planning and transportation needs to critically report on all of our current challenges, even the ones that originate politically or in other departments. I know this is an unfair thing to ask, but I ask it nonetheless because people are dying in the streets. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Next up.
Next is Mark Fig.
Good evening, Mark Fig, Fig Property Group. I just have a few comments I want to make regarding the planning transportation. You talk a lot about housing stock and, the need for owner occupant properties. And I will just say that we've done tons of housing studies now on multiple levels. I've been involved in most of them. It's clear we need housing of all types and we need it now. There's a market for owner occupant housing. The market will take care of that owner occupant construction and development. The major problem is the city of Bloomington does not have a lot of land really earmarked for that type of property. I know there are some, and I'm sure they're in play now. So I do urge the council when it comes to annexation to be bold and do that, because I don't think we're going to solve our housing problem until we get some more property in the city under city zoning control and infrastructure to match. Again, the private market will build that housing. You just got to have a place to do it. The best thing the city can do is to work on, the infrastructure to match those things and to incentivize single family ownership, being gentle on infrastructure to development. I'm not saying skimp, but don't make all the infrastructure go in all up front. That's a disincentive for a developer. Try to do it in phases as done in the past. You can bond for those things. So I would just add that in terms of PUDs, big sites usually lend themselves to PUDs, and that should be able to be on the table. I will commend the UDO and this body for making that happen. It does densify and make things possible. I don't like having design police. I can tell you people have different view of architecture, and ugly is pretty to somebody. So we just need to try to manage it as best we can. And I think the current system does that okay. And again,
thank you very much, Mr. Fig. I'm sorry, it's been 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
2 minutes is too fast.
Quick. Okay, any other public comments?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, I think we can now go back to council members for more questions. Start with more questions if we have any after public comment. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so we can go into debate and discussion. Would anyone like to comment? Councilmember Flaherty?
Yes, sure. I know I came in late, so I have more work to do in a review. Though I've read things and looked at the presentation. Just wanted to comment on a handful of things. I'm going to abstain tonight because I'm still doing research and engaging in some back and forth with the administration about priorities and how well we're doing with our plans. I will say I would like to know the answer before November 17th about the high priority bicycle network. I understand that we have, just like the Economic Sustainable Development Department, we may not get all that information we want in time for the budget cycle, but when there are specific questions like a number of us submitted prior to the budget hearings, I think getting those answered ideally before these meetings would be really helpful. It's hard for me to make priorities and good decisions if we aren't getting questions answered. So I hope for that information in the next few weeks sometime. Let's see. On housing, I look forward to reviewing the information about the ADU priorities. I think there's a variety of things we could take there and maybe want to continue the conversation a little bit. Just a few comments on housing. I agree we need housing diversity in this community, and I think that will help deliver more opportunities of both ownership and rental. I think it's worth noting that rental housing numbers in this community are actually, if you take out the student population who are overwhelmingly renters, we're actually pretty much on par with the rest of the country. We're not different. We have a normal rental and ownership rate among non-student population. Interesting news fact, California just allowed duplexes in the entire state, every residential piece of land everywhere, to try to increase supply, add ownership opportunities. I know we've started down that path just barely. Hopefully we can make some progress there. Another interesting fact, I live in a condo, what some people might call a large multifamily building. We have a much higher owner occupancy rate than the city as a whole. I think the housing strategy, and I think Ms. Meyerson made really compelling points about that, and want to continue to pursue that with planning and transportation in hand. I think our documents and strategies such as they are have gaps and aren't unified. And I think in particular, some of these regulatory changes around duplexes, as well as the formation of a community land trust, should absolutely be part of that strategy. And we're not going to know how to leverage and capitalize on that if it's not part of a plan. So I want to continue to push for that. And I will leave it at that for tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Flaherty. Councilmember Rallo?
Yeah, picking up on Councilmember Flaherty's remarks. Yes, we do have a large student population, and they set the market rent. So we end up with those who are renting paying exorbitantly high rents, and that consists of a rent trap. And so there's no way they can get out of that trap. And the past few housing studies I've seen have indicated that people are looking for single family homes, but they can't find them. So what we have, I think what we've aided in this, I'm afraid to say, our city government is a rentier class that is extracting wealth from the community. Many of these people don't live in the community. And if you rent, you have less disposable income that could be used to build wealth in the community. And you're not building equity for that matter. So I'm afraid Mr. Robinson is correct. I think that we don't have many options available to us without entering into legal trouble by offering incentives. And we've made matters worse, I think, because by throwing away zoning requirements for single family homes, we lost that form as a requirement in areas. And that does two things. One is it converts single family homes because of profitability to rent it. And the other is that we just simply, we've given up on that form of housing. Now, am I confident that the market will solve our problems? No, not entirely. I think the market can it certainly acts to increase its profitability, but I don't think that it necessarily will do a public good. So I sort of abandon hope there. So we are in a quandary. I think that we're basically subjecting quite a lot of our residents to this rent trap. And there may be financial ways out. I don't know. There may be ways in which we can develop a down payment for people so they can be paying a mortgage instead of a monthly rent. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Rallo. Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Yes, I'm really pleased to see that some guidance for people who want to create ADUs is planned for next year and some funds in the budget to do that. As far as the corridor studies that are in our transportation plan, I agree with Councilmember Flaherty that 3rd Street and Atwater should be priority over College and Walnut because of the safety issues that are clear in that corridor. I would respectfully disagree with Director Robinson that this is not the right time to pursue the Kirkwood Avenue as a shared street. I think it's exactly the right time to do that because people have been experiencing the street very differently. And this is an opportunity to say, well, let's look at the longer term and how can we make this street safer and more user-friendly for everybody. And finally, I will be abstaining from this budget because as Councilmember Flaherty pointed out, there are some questions that were submitted several weeks ago that we have not gotten answers to, and those would impact my decision on the budget. So I'll be passing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Volan.
Yeah, several thoughts. First of all, I'm starting to come around to the argument that 3rd and Atwater is more important than Walnut and College because of the pedestrian deaths there, 3 of them. And it's just, I mean, I get why College and Walnut, I mean, it's a close call. I think that they both should be done as soon as possible, but the department can only do so much. I agree with Councilmember Piedmont Smith about the idea of a shared street, about looking at Kirkwood as a shared street, but I feel like 3rd and Atwater is more important right now, simply put. And frankly, College and Walnut have been, you know, we've needed to re-examine both of those for a long time. They're important too. So we have to pick which one is going to be done first. You know, I don't want to relitigate the whole plexus debate, but Councilman Barallo's characterization of it is surprising to me, even though I shouldn't be surprised by it. He says people are looking for single-family homes. Certain people are looking for single-family homes. Most people are looking for someplace they can afford. They don't, you know, single-family home is a luxury. It's a luxury that, you know, America's made the mistake of thinking was indefinitely possible. Sure, everyone's looking for a single-family home, but they settle for what they can find. What they need to find is affordable housing. We need to be thinking more strongly about making buildings into condos, making denser buildings into condos. But you know, having stock, encouraging condominiums so that people can buy a place that's not as expensive as a single-family home. So I don't, but I didn't want to relitigate this tonight. This is about the planning department budget. I think the planning department budget is adequate. I mean, the only way we could do those corridor studies at this point is to increase staff beyond, you know, what's feasible. So, I mean, I'm generally supportive of the way the planning functions. They do good work. If only other departments would listen to what they say, that there might be a more coherent policy across the city. So with that, I'll be supporting the budget tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from council members? I'll just do one quickly. I plan to abstain tonight. I think I still have some questions and want to take a deeper look to just really see if some of the priorities from the transportation plan that, you know, goals we're potentially not meeting can be added in. Also, something I didn't talk about, but Mr. Robinson, you brought up that we're a Vision Zero city, I think. So I want to touch on a little bit of what we've done in terms of Vision Zero implementations and what we're planning for 2022. I'm a huge fan of the goal of 0 traffic deaths in a year. I think that's really important. I'll just stop there for tonight. And I think if there's nobody else we can do, go ahead and move to a roll call vote for a due pass recommendation. I will just call people as I see them on the screen. Councilmember Sandberg?
Yes.
Councilmember Scambolery,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty,
Yes, I'm sorry, abstain.
Councilmember Volan,
Yes.
Councilmember Sims,
Yes.
Councilmember Rallo,
Yes.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith,
Abstain.
and I will also abstain. So that is that is 603 for planning and transportation budget. Okay, Mr. Robinson, thank you so much for being with us tonight. That was lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very much.
Mr. Robbins.
Up next, we have the budget for engineering, and Director Andrew Seabour is here to present. Welcome, and you can get started when you're ready.
Great, thank you. Let me load my presentation here. All right, can you see my slide?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. All right, good evening, council members. I'm Andrew Seabour, the city engineer and the director of the engineering department. I look forward to providing you with an overview of the engineering department and our 2022 budget proposal. The engineering department was established as the standalone department in 2021 based on a recommendation of an organizational assessment. The newly created engineering department coordinates closely with planning and transportation and public works to achieve a safe, accessible, efficient, equitable, and sustainable transportation system. The engineering 2022 budget includes 10.5 full-time equivalent employees. The department shares resources with planning and transportation, especially administrative staff support. The proposed budget includes a new part-time administrative assistant position to enhance our administrative capacity. We divide the department into a capital projects division and a right-of-way management division. I will describe those two divisions in more detail later in this presentation. Administration, technical training, accountability, and community engagement are items that are a part of all that we do. For example, these items include managing project websites, facilitating monthly project coordination meetings, supporting a large number of boards and commissions, and attending and hosting community meetings. A few major initiatives of our department include managing use and work within the right-of-way, addressing transportation-related inquiries from the public, and implementing the city's transportation plan. The transportation plan is referenced regularly when reviewing and developing city-led capital projects and private projects that impact the public right-of-way. This and the following two slides illustrates the budget goals as they were listed in the 2021 budget presentations. These lists highlight many of the initiatives the department is responsible for, but is not a comprehensive list of all that we do. The engineering department coordinates with planning and transportation, public works, and others to identify future projects based on data and plans, such as complete street scoring, the transportation plan, and infrastructure age and condition to ensure that limited resources are distributed throughout the city. As we continue to build new transportation infrastructure, we are becoming more mindful of the different and increased maintenance needs the city is responsible for. This should be anticipated in this and future year Public Works and Parks and Recreation Department budget requests. 2021 has already been a very busy year with a number of projects like the 7 line starting construction. Engineering has issued 11 new contracts so far, ranging from the design of the Bloomington Hospital Site Redevelopment Phase 1 East Infrastructure Project to a small landscape planning contract. In 2021, we also started utilizing a new Title 12 ordinance that deals with the use of the right-of-way. The new ordinance enhanced our ability to educate and enforce city requirements for work within the public right-of-way. As with all major changes, this effort continues to result in refinements to our processes and identification of opportunities to further enhance our tools. Engineering is currently working with other departments, such as ITS, to develop technology and tools to better track and measure many of our goals. In addition to better reporting, I'm hopeful that these tools will also streamline workflow for staff and customers. Now looking ahead to the 2022 budget and the department's primary activities, the capital projects team is the division that implements our city-led transportation infrastructure projects. This work includes design, right-of-way acquisition, bidding, and construction oversight of projects. These multimodal projects implement the city's transportation plan and requires close coordination with multiple internal and external stakeholders. Many of our 2022 goals remain consistent from 2021. For example, we will continue to initiate a series of new transportation improvement projects. Some of the new projects will include signal enhancements and protected bicycle lanes on West 2nd Street from the Beeline to Walker, crosswalk enhancement projects throughout the city, and a curb ramp accessibility improvement project downtown. Each of those projects I just listed will leverage federal funding awarded and programmed through the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Additionally, engineering is leading the Phase 1 East infrastructure project as a part of the city's larger goal to implement the hospital site redevelopment master plan. It's our goal that construction of this project will start next year. Given recent questions pertaining to the city's investment in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, the engineering department compiled this graph, which illustrates the annual capital project spending and the proportion of each year's spending on bicycle and pedestrian facilities. I want to highlight two important items to be aware of while reviewing this information. First, the overall spending amounts illustrated as blue bars include federal funding, council sidewalk funding, grants, bonds, TIF, and engineering's annual capital project funding, which is typically comprised of a combination of general fund, alternative transportation, and cumulative capital development. Engineering's annual capital outlay budget is a small proportion of total project spending. The percent, and then number two, the percent pedestrian and bicycle facility split is an estimate, and the estimate could be debated on a project-by-project basis. However, I believe the estimate is sufficient to highlight funding split proportions and trends. So with these two important notes in mind, I'd like to highlight three conclusions from this slide. First, the engineering department capital project expenditures come from a number of sources, and we leverage the annual budget request to the maximum extent possible. Two, yearly project spending can vary significantly depending on a few large projects and the successful award of outside funding sources. And finally, number three, the department has realized a significant trend in increasing active transportation mode investment from less than 20% of all engineering spending in 2014 to over 70% in 2020. Now, the right-of-way management division issues and monitors right-of-way use permits and outdoor seating permits. It investigates and addresses transportation-related inquiries from the public, and it analyzes and collects traffic counts and crash data. Like capital projects, our right-of-way management division goals remain similar to those highlighted for the current year. Some new goals or changes to existing goals include increasing our expectation for responding to right-of-way permit applications promptly from 90 to 95% within 2 weeks. And number two, holding ourselves accountable for ensuring all public improvement bonds associated with new subdivisions are kept active 100% of the time until the new facilities are accepted into the city's maintenance inventory. The engineering department is still relatively new, and our overall 2022 budget proposal is similar to 2021 with a 6% overall decrease. Some of the specific highlights of significance include adding a new part-time administrative assistant position, as previously mentioned, an increase in other services and charges, primarily driven by a $30,000 request to renew our on-call service contract for engineering assistance with traffic signal operation expertise, and a 26% decrease in capital outlays. While this is a significant decrease, I want to reemphasize that these funds are only a portion of our capital project funds. The funds shown in this budget request will primarily be used to provide the local match necessary to leverage federal funding. I also want to highlight that $550,000 in Recover Forward Phase 3 American Rescue Plan Act funds are proposed to supplement the typical engineering department annual budget funding sources. These funds will be specifically targeted towards Phase 1 priority bicycle network facilities identified in the transportation plan. I estimate this to translate into the construction of 3 segments of the proposed neighborhood greenway system. This slide captures the engineering department budget summary in a table format. As previously mentioned, the 2022 budget reflects an overall decrease of 6% compared to 2021. And again, in addition to our budget summary, $550,000 in ARPA funds are proposed in 2022. Thank you for your time and consideration of this budget, which we believe aligns with the city's stated goals as identified in the transportation plan and comprehensive plan. Thank you again, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seymour. That was great. We will entertain questions from council. Okay, it looks like first up we have Council Member Rollo. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Council Chair Rosenberger. Mr. Seymour, welcome back. I haven't seen you personally since you've come back, but I'm happy that you've chosen to come back to us. I have a question regarding, as an engineer, you're focused, I think, primarily on what could be called gray infrastructure. So streets, sidewalks, bike paths, curbs, and then we have stormwater engineers that put in pipes and so forth. And then there's a green infrastructure that could be integrated with the gray infrastructure. So say, green buffers, obviously tree plantings, rain gardens, maybe detention areas. And I think we could optimize those areas for ecological diversity and for the actual purpose of, say, mitigating stormwater and things like that. I wondered about, do you do that in-house? Do you coordinate with, say, planning and transportation? Do you Parks and Rec? I would note that Rebecca Swift, who I mentioned last night, has extraordinary talent in this regard. I mean, the plantings downtown are really remarkable for native species. So do you do that in-house? Do you coordinate with other departments? How does it happen?
Great question. I would say there's a lot of coordination. I think a big part of what the engineering department does is coordinate with other departments. I think when it comes to those type of items you listed, we coordinate closely with the CBU as an example. 7 Line is a great project that's under construction, and there's a number of rain gardens that are part of that project. So that's something that we work with them on, and they're actually helping to fund some of those. We also work regularly with Parks and Recreation to identify tree species, plantings, where we can install them, how many, that type of thing. Related, I think worth mentioning is tomorrow I'm meeting with a few staff from ESD to talk about the hospital phase 1 East project and ways that we can implement sustainable features within the transportation infrastructure area. So I think from my perspective, it's a team approach, and a lot of those projects also we hire experts and that also bring things to the table. So it's probably not necessarily it's not all in-house at all. I guess that's the answer.
I see, but it sounds like you're actively working in this regard.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great news. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Seymour. I was fascinated by the chart that you had, which showed spending and the percentage spent on bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Could you put that back up, please? Because I didn't quite understand the difference between the blue bars and the yellow dots.
Sure, just one. All right, I can't see you now, but can you see that slide?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, so the blue bar represents total dollars spent in a given calendar year. The yellow dot represents of that total spent money, what came from our general fund, alternative transportation, and CD and 601. So it just tries to illustrate that, roughly between, let's say, around $1 million, let's say on an average of combined funding of those sources to help. That's a part of the blue bar. Does that help? Did I explain that already?
Yeah, so I guess my question is, where does the rest of the money come from? The substantial percentage is just in the blue bar above the yellow dots.
Absolutely. A number of sources. I think some of the probably most significant sources would be the MPO, a lot of federal funding for a lot of our projects. And another big source would be a lot of the bonds that have gone through. I think from GO bonds to bicentennial bonds, just a series of bonds have certainly contributed. And then probably the other big significant contributor would be TIF funds. There's certainly other sources as well, but those I think can be pretty big dollar amounts from each of those funding sources.
And one last question on this. You mentioned bonds, so I'm wondering if Parks and Recs trails are counted in this.
The Parks and Rec trails, that would be projects constructed and administered by the engineering department. So mostly probably not, but an example right now would be Jackson Creek Trail. That is a project that was designed and run the whole process through the engineering department. So that would be reflected in this.
I'm sorry, so what's the determining factor whether parks projects are reflected here or not?
I guess this is really engineering department or engineering division related projects, things that we managed. And I don't know if there have been, I guess I don't, that's the big thing. What has been led through the engineering department?
Okay, well, I might follow up with you just to better understand that. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Other questions from council members? Councilmember Scambolari.
Yes, thank you. Can you put that slide back up, please, Mr. Seaborn? Sorry.
Sure. No problem. I wish I could manage it better so I could see you guys when I do that.
Perfect. Thank you. So just to make sure I'm understanding what I'm seeing here, in the year 2020, just over what, $12 million was spent on capital projects in engineering's orbit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And of that, roughly $2 million came from the 101, 454, and 601.
Correct.
And then the gray line is my remaining question. Am I reading correctly that those were bike and ped facilities? 70% of them were bike and ped facilities, or?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and just one more quick question. I don't know where I am on time. How do we decide where we're going to do traffic volume studies? What's that process?
Sure. Traffic volume studies are most commonly probably just generated from public inquiries to follow up as a part of a traffic related request. They also are done to supplement, helping us to identify projects or helping make decisions as we develop projects. I think as a good example, we have a new traffic calming guide that we follow. And as a part of that process, to help prioritize which projects or which applications should be prioritized, we use traffic count data. So we went out and collected data for those. So it could be a number of things, but probably honestly, the most common thing would be to help us in our technical evaluations in response to public inquiries.
Thank you. And you mentioned that there are, you hope to collect at least 40 traffic volume counts in 21. Now, are those all chosen already? Are they taking shape now? What are all the slots full, I guess is my question.
No, they are not full. And I guess, honestly, I don't have the number handy, but we are well on track to exceed that 40 number threshold. So, but yeah, I think we still have some capacity. I think key things that we look at when we're looking at traffic counts is summer counts aren't always going to get us the same results to reflect typical conditions. And then also in the winter, it can be tricky with the risk of snow or ice, and snow plows can cause some damage to our equipment. So we try to avoid those timeframes and holidays, but so really spring and fall, like right now we're in prime time for data collection.
Thank you very much.
Other questions from council members? Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Seaboard, for the presentation. First, just a clarification: did the alternative transportation fund used to be in your department and is no longer? Is that accurate?
Alternative transportation has typically been an engineering department, or at least portions of it. I think it's a shared fund with a number of departments, but it's always had a portion within engineering. I think, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and maybe I just don't understand that structure well enough. Is it still in the engineering department, or is it across multiple?
It is.
Or shared?
Engineering definitely receives some funding from alternative transportation.
What's the total alternative transportation fund budget this year?
In 20, I'd have to look it up honestly off the top of my, I don't have that number memorized.
Okay, no problem. You don't have any money in your budget for a multi-use path from Clubhouse Drive to College Avenue for this year, do you?
No, I do not.
Okay, just checking, thanks. And when it comes, we discussed a little bit, I know your department's partially responsible for implementing the transportation plan. We discussed with Mr. Robinson a bit about the high priority bicycle network in particular, and whether or not we're on track. Do you think we're on track to meet the timelines established in the plan, or do you know?
Honestly, I suspect that we are behind the desired schedule if I'm being honest. I think that typically when new plans and programs are developed, I would expect there to be some lag to kick a new program off, to start the design, and it just takes time to really get things rolling. So I would say we are behind, but we are making progress. That would be my assessment.
Thank you. And do you think your department, working with others, will be able to tell us during this budget cycle what the expected completion timeline of that network is if we're not on time?
I think that it would be fair for us to try to get you more answers to your questions.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from council members? Any second round? That's good. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, I wanted to ask something that I had asked Mr. Robinson, and it seems to be more appropriate for you, Mr. Seaboard, which is you report or other complaints that come in about blocking sidewalks. Has that been less of a problem since we did the Title 12 revisions last year, or what can you tell us about that?
Sure, and maybe just so I can clarify, this is in relation to like a construction project or somebody closing off a sidewalk.
Yeah.
I guess I'm probably somewhat at an unfair advantage to answer this question since I wasn't around last year or the year before. But I guess I can at least state that I feel confident we have more tools at our disposal to respond to those requests. But I guess I would probably want to ask for some more time to actually see if we can do some digging in that data.
Yes, if you could find out, how many complaints there have been and how long it took to resolve them, I would appreciate that.
Sure.
Thanks.
Other questions from any council members? Okay, I think this is a good time for us. Okay, Councilmember Flaherty.
I'm sorry, thank you. I wasn't quick to jump in there because I didn't know there were more. I wanted to ask about the climate action plan, actually, Mr. Seaboard. I think we learned yesterday that I know it's a very large and comprehensive document with a lot of actions planned in an 8-year implementation timeframe. And I was wondering if anyone in your department is charged or tasked with implementing portions that may have a engineering component in terms of design priorities, funding priorities, staff capacity, all of that. I think my sense from last night was that there isn't staff capacity in ESD to handle the full transportation plan, but theoretically there could be if like, do you have specific actions from the climate action plan that you could list for us or name for us that your department's working on?
I probably don't have that type of information for you right now. I can at least report that actually earlier today, there was essentially the city had a climate action team meeting to start to continue the conversations about those goals and for various departments to provide updates on what they are doing to try to target some of those goals. And so I represented the engineering department as a part of that conversation. So I guess what I can say right now is that is a topic on all of our agendas, and it is something being actively at least coordinated within all the different departments that could be affected.
Okay, thank you. I might have some follow-ups in writing about that, but I appreciate your answer.
Sure.
Any other questions right now from council members? Okay, let's take some time and go to the public for public comment. If anyone is out there and would like to comment, you can raise your hand and you will have 2 minutes. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone so far?
Yes, I believe first up is Greg Alexander.
Okay, Mr. Alexander, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Greg Alexander. Man, there's so much to say. First, I got to give credit for a few projects that are really excellent. The intersection redesign at Adams and Kirkwood, for example, amazing. The 7 line is great too. On the other hand, I'm super excited that the responsibility for sidewalk enforcement has unambiguously moved out of hand and into engineering, but I sadly have to report that it hasn't worked yet. Several of my U reports in July were marked as fixed, even though the trees are still blocking the sidewalk. But it's a pretty big change, and I think they do deserve a chance to figure out how it's going to work. Construction site inspection is in that same condition. The new changes to Title 12 are super promising, but it hasn't worked yet. There was a project by my house called the Bentley at 11th and College. It was in progress from January until this week. They were out of compliance even before their permit to work in the right of way was heard by the Board of Public Works. But engineering staff recommended approval even so. Then for the next 2 months, every single day, the workers were blocking the sidewalk in violation of that permit. And then for the last 2 months, from mid-June until mid-August, they again blocked the sidewalk every day in violation of that permit. I can't tell you what efforts were put in by engineering staff, but I can tell you it's not working yet. The contractor treated the sidewalks exactly the way they would have before the Title 12 change was passed. And then there's some projects that I'm really concerned about because we're just going with the status quo. For example, there's an upcoming side path project at 17th and Kinzer. It will actually increase the pedestrian crossing distance. That's horrible. Reducing that distance is the most fundamental intersection design principle for side paths. And this project that purports to put pedestrians first actually goes the other direction. Bad intersection design on side paths is still epidemic in our city. It is super discouraging to witness. So there's reason to be optimistic, especially with the brand new director. They deserve some time to work this out, but we need to be clear that we aren't there yet. People are still walking in the streets where the sidewalks are blocked. Thank
you, Mr. Alexander. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone else?
I don't see any additional comments at the moment.
Okay, I think we can go back to council for debate and final comments. Would anyone like to speak? Councilmember Piedmont Smith. Also, if we have other questions, of course, feel free to ask.
Yes, actually, I had a follow-up question that Mr. Alexander's comment reminded me of. So I actually learned just yesterday that, oops, I'm sorry, that it is the engineering department that is supposed to resolve situations where sidewalks are blocked with overgrowth and things like that. So I know this is a common problem. It is in my neighborhood and certainly in Mr. Alexander's neighborhood, as we've heard. So how does your department handle that? And are there any plans to possibly improve enforcement?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I had a feeling that it would come up today based on yesterday's conversation. I think the short answer is yes, engineering is responsible for those items. It actually falls in through Title 12, a different section of the right-of-way use that actually sort of relates to Parks and Recreation, but we have an agreement where engineering really takes that piece on. So essentially, the way something like that would work is if there's a particular location, I'd ask somebody to notify us through a report or another means, and we would go out and evaluate it. Ultimately, it may result in us contacting that property owner who's responsible for maintaining the sidewalk and the clearance of that sidewalk. And I fully recognize that it is an issue throughout the city. So my team has actually more recently been starting to be more proactive in trying to identify ways to help educate the public on this, because frankly, my hunch is that a lot of residents don't even know what they're always responsible to do. So we've talked about putting together, and I think drafting press releases, creating door hangers. So we've had conversations with legal and parks and others to start that process. So part of it's education. That's always the preferred option. And then there's also enforcement and sending letters. So that's really how we're trying to manage that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rallo.
Just following up on that, does that include things like sidewalk grinding when there's trees lift sections? And so you have this uneven nature, people trip?
I think that kind of topic, honestly, I think probably falls more to the public works department. So this gets where it's all very confusing on who is responsible for what. But essentially like a trip hazard or a heaved sidewalk, I think public works tends to be primarily responsible for coordinating those.
Okay, that will be for Adam Weisen then. Thank you.
Councilmember Piedmont-Smith.
Sorry, I thought of another follow-up. So is it legal for the city to actually cut back brush, or do you have to have the property owner do it? And then my follow-up to that is would it be legal for me or anybody else who's trying to walk down that sidewalk to cut the brush?
I guess whenever I hear the word legal, I get a little nervous. I'm being honest. But my suspicion is that it would be perfectly acceptable technically for the city to go ahead and cut that brush, or for you to go to your neighbors and to do that. But I would want to double check. But I guess when it comes to the city helping out in that capacity, that wouldn't be something necessarily that engineering could do, but the concern is always going to be capacity and staff and resources to be able to take that extra maintenance burden on.
Thank you.
And I think we had a comment come in, a public comment come in that Mr. Lucas will read to us.
Yes, thank you. I think there was a comment that someone was trying to submit and just took a bit longer. Sam Dove comments as follows. The road work on Highway 37 through 69 through Indianapolis, when will they be done with that road work? And that is the comment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dove, for that comment. We can continue on with council. Mr. Seaboard, if you want to speak, if you could answer the question about 69 and 37.
And I guess if I'm being honest, I don't know the details of that project because it's outside our county, so I've not been actively managing it.
Thank you so much. So back to council for debate, final comments on the engineering budget. Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Seaborg, for the presentation and for all the work you and your staff do. I'm going to abstain tonight. I feel like I don't have enough information yet. I feel like also a number of departmental budgets have interactions with each other, and I'm still sort of tracking down how that's sorting out and how it might impact my budget priorities in terms of staffing capacity, funding priorities, et cetera. So definitely would like to get those questions answered that were submitted July 1. And I probably have, I will definitely have more written questions following up on the budget meetings here, just like we did last year. A few thoughts from the presentation and discussion. I think when it comes to spending figures in terms of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, I applaud the efforts to increase percentages over the last, well over Mayor Hamilton's term. But I think the picture presented on that slide is very, very far from being a complete picture. To start, we've got 30 plus million bonded for parking garages to subsidize driving, single occupancy vehicle use. We've got annual subsidies for parking, surface lots, spending on traffic signals, snow plowing, street sweeping, pothole filling, repaving, which is like 2 point something million, I forget offhand. The list goes on and on and on, the ways that we prioritize automobiles still in spending. And even using things like gas tax for leaf collection, which is not very logical, I don't think, in terms of spending what that money could or should be used for, given the source. And of course, what we also have to keep in mind on top of that is that we've had, 70 plus years of pretty much automobile dominated infrastructure. We are in such a massive hole that it will, of course, take a seismic and shift and sea change to meet our goals. And so the absolute number doesn't really mean anything to me. What means something to me, what I'm interested in, is, are we achieving our established city goals? Whether or not we're implementing projects and programs within the expected timelines of our plans. And sadly, most recently, I'm wondering whether we're following our adopted plans as opposed to ignoring them. A quick note on the climate action plan. Mr. Seaborn mentioned an internal climate team meeting. The council member is supposed to have a representative at that meeting, according to the climate action plan. I emailed about that just recently, having realized that recommendation hadn't been implemented yet since we approved the plan in April. Hopefully we'll hear back more. Mr. Crowley promised to get back to me about it. And this council can then decide who they would like to be a member of that team. But I still would like to learn more and know more about exactly how we're going to implement the 266 actions in the climate action plan in the 8-year implementation timeframe. So I'll be asking about that in the context of transportation and many other departments. Thank you again. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Other comments, Council Member Rollo?
Mr. Seaborn, thank you for your presentation. I think that you are really very talented in terms of integrating bike and pedestrian infrastructure with our current infrastructure. And I've seen a lot of proof of that before, and you left and after you returned. And I just want to extend my thanks. I know that, the Sarah Road multi-use path, which cost several $1 million, is an integral part of bike and pedestrian infrastructure, is now completed. That intersection improvement at Morris Pike and Sarah Road, the bicycle paths on bicycle lanes on College Mall Road, and now the 7th Street bike route is pretty extraordinary. So I think we're very well placed to have this department integrate what we all want, which is a very integrated and robust biking and ped infrastructure. So I'll be supporting your budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Other council member comments? 3, 2, 1. Okay, I think we can consider a due pass recommendation on the engineering budget. I will call the roll backwards from what I'm seeing. Council Member Volan?
Yes.
Council Member Flaherty?
Abstain.
Council Member Sims?
Yes.
Council Member Smith?
Yes.
Council Member Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Council Member Rollo?
Yes.
Council Member Scambalori?
Yes.
Council Member Sandberg?
Yes.
And I will abstain. So we have 702 on the engineering budget. Thank you very much, Mr. Seaborn, for being here tonight with us. Great seeing you again.
Thank you all.
Okay, and now continuing on to the public works portion of the evening. Mr. Wason is joining us. Hello, and you will be with us for the rest of the night. So welcome. we can start with Public Works Administration whenever you're ready. I think you have 10 minutes for everything, and then Streets has 15.
All righty. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome.
Yes, and we
All
see
right.
your screen.
Excellent. Adam Wason, Public Works Director for the City of Bloomington here tonight. Once again, I'll be the final act in the marathon that is the budget presentations for the week. From my quick math, it seems as though the entire council can hear the budget presentations from all of my department head colleagues in about the same amount of time it takes Councilmember Flaherty to run 100 miles through the Colorado mountains. We're up to just about 17 hours for the week, and learning of his recent accomplishments, it's quite similar. It's always an honor and a privilege to be in front of you. While we quickly look back at the last year of all that we've been doing in public works, but also while looking at the year ahead. It's been a year of great challenges and even tragedy in public works. This past year has been one of the most trying in my entire in my entire career. I'd be completely remiss tonight to not start by recognizing the public service of two public works employees who left us this year. Lisa Bolin was a longtime city employee in the public works, fleet maintenance, and street divisions. She was cheerful and a wonderful person to work with, and we're sorry we've lost her. Doug Deckard, a parking enforcement officer, was also lost way too soon. We in Public Works continue to send our condolences to each of their families. I'd also like to thank several employees for their long and dedicated service to the city and wish them the best in their retirement. Stanley LaPasa, Mark Arnold, Greg Hupp, Daniel James, Daryl Rubel, and Mike Stinson will all be retiring from the street department this year. Nadine Eubanks, she was a 16-year animal control officer for the Animal Care and Control Division. Roy Bruce worked for over 10 years at the Sanitation Division. John Hartman worked for parking enforcement and facilities over his career. With those employees, over 150 years were provided in service to the city. I know I speak for all of our staff in Public Works when I wish them the absolute best in their retirement. I'd also be remiss not to note one additional city retirement, and that's former Deputy Mayor Mick Reneisen. Mick was not only a great colleague, but also a great friend and mentor. So I wish them all their best in their retirement. Now, moving on to the past year and the year ahead. I'd be lying through my teeth if I didn't tell you that it's been a really, really challenging year. The roughly 135 employees of the Public Works Department have shown up each and every day, even throughout these challenges. We've provided all the services that we always have, and I'm quite proud to be on the team with all of these staff members. For the Public Works Administrative Division in particular, we're the division that offers administrative services through to the 6 other divisions of Public Works, as well as to the Board of Public Works in their biweekly meetings. We're 6 full-time employees, and our major initiatives in 21 include continued efforts at modernization and the uses of technology and asset management and all of the things that we do. 2021 budget goal updates. We're working on many things, including sidewalk improvements and lighting upgrades. By the end of 2021, 56 street lights will have been converted to LED. And that's a total of 221 since 2016 that we've upgraded in our partnership with Duke Energy. All city, I'm also proud to announce that all city-owned streetlights have been converted to 100% LED technology. For the Board of Public Works, as I mentioned, we meet bi-weekly. The Board of Public Works meetings are often robust in the amount of preparation that it takes to bring each meeting forward. For the board is considered the chief administrative body of the city for all departments that are non-public safety and non-parks. They approve all public uses of the right-of-way, or private uses of the public right-of-way, all special events, noise permits, and so much more. Updating our field reconnaissance project. is another big part of what we've been doing. Our pavement, sidewalks, ADA curb ramps are all scheduled to be updated in 2021. And we're quite proud of all of our efforts of digitizing and using technology in the field to update our asset management efforts. Onto our 2022 budget goals. You've heard me talk in the past few years about accreditation. We are in the process of moving our Public Works Department towards American Public Works Association accreditation. We would be only one of this, if achieved, we would be the second agency in the state. And that 2 to 3 year process has been underway over the last couple of years. This requires us to provide policy documentation of all of our management practices in order to meet American Public Works Association standards. Additional asset management projects underway right now. Well, for 2022 that we're looking to implement is moving towards implementing a GIS mapping capacity to our current asset management system. This gets into the weeds pretty deep, but in the end, our asset management system can talk with the back-end GIS system with ITS and has provided a bunch of new efficiencies for us there. We're literally the front door of City Hall and all the services that are provided out of City Hall. We've been open since since almost all of COVID, and proud of the efforts to continue providing the services even in these challenging times. Just a few budget highlights. Changes in Category 1 are due to some movement of salaries to the appropriate divisions. You remember we did create a parking services division last year, so we're making some changes there. And then also the big change is there's the decrease of $1 million due to a previous year transfer from Public Works Admin to the Motor Vehicle Highway Fund. Overall, the budget request for the administrative division is $2.15 million, and that's a decrease of $1.28 million. Again, that major decrease due to a transfer not taking place in 2022. I'm happy to answer any questions, and in the end, just want to let you know that we're very proud of the efforts that we have in the administrative division in supporting all the other divisions. I want to make a special thanks to Nate Nickel, our business and data manager, who spent countless hours working with all the different division heads on this year's budgets, and just big thanks to he and the team for where we've gotten. So happy to answer any questions on the Public Works Administrative Division budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wason. We will go to council questions. If anyone has a question, okay, Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Wason. Thank you. You mentioned so many retirements or pending retirements. May I ask you, are you hiring? How many vacancies do you have? Is this a time to make a pitch for people to apply?
We do actually, yes, especially if you want to be a school crossing guard. But no, most of these are retirements that have happened throughout the entire year. So these aren't all just right now, but wanted to note and recognize all those years of service from those folks. But you can always find open jobs at the City of Bloomington at bloomington.in.gov/jobs. And I do know there are several open right now.
Thank you. That is all.
Thank you, Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Wason. If this question is better directed elsewhere later in your budget presentation, please let me know. But I saw the notes about infrastructure asset management, which I very much approve. I think your department over the years has done a very good job of systematizing and improving our knowledge of conditions in a way that we can really target, our actions and have them in a sort of life cycle sustainable way. And I wanted to ask about that specifically in the context of signal interchanges that may not be ADA compliant. If we know, what's the status of those? You've probably heard me asking other departments.
Specifically of signalized intersections that are not ADA compliant in terms, what aspect in terms of the audibles or?
I think the audibles is probably the most significant one I'm thinking of. I think there are also some other requirements though, or accessibility best practices in terms of where the button's located, the height, that sort of thing.
Sure, I couldn't give you absolute specifics there off the top of my head. What I can tell you is we're working very closely with the engineering department. And just to back up a little bit, I guess, when it comes to signalized intersections, those touch several different departments. We work very closely with engineering, the traffic division, the traffic portion of the street division also works very closely with engineering on all things signals. One of our big requests for 2022, and you'll see this in our street department request, is that we're asking for funds to do a full study and report on all of our signalized intersections and the technologies that are at each of them. We've got a wide variety of technologies at our intersections of different ages and different eras. And so that's what we're going to be asking for as part of our street division budget request.
Thank you. And with that study or cataloging of all our interchanges and what the signals have technology wise, would that include something like ADA compliance?
Yeah, especially for the aspects of the actual traffic signal. So the audibles and all those. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So hopefully we'll have an inventory next year.
Yes.
Okay. Small follow-up still. What is there a process currently in place for how to? I'm thinking of Patterson and Rogers in particular. Is the trouble intersection that brought this broader issue to my attention? And is there how do we decide? So that one's not compliant. There's no audible signal. I imagine it is more expensive than I think to update, but how do we go about deciding where would money be for something like that? Or are we just not really there yet?
Well, decisions on, updating traffic signals. I think 17th and Dunn's been a good example, working with engineering. They, brought forward that project. I think we're, going to look at prioritizing based on higher volumes of pedestrian traffic, things like that. And I think Rogers and Patterson would be a great place to look at such things. So I think the age of the equipment, the age of the signal, those sorts of things are going to be what determines where we're going to prioritize, as well as, pedestrian volumes, traffic volumes, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
Other council member questions? I am not sure. I would say I can ask one, I think, but is this just administration? If it's street related, wait for street.
Some of the topics are obviously, am I muted? No, I think a lot of the topics are kind of cross divisional, from the administrative. This budget is specific just to the administrative division. So I would say traffic signals and traffic could wait till street.
Okay, wonderful. So while I'm not seeing any hands up, we can open this to public comment for Public Works Administration. Comments, questions from Mr. Lucas, are you seeing anything?
Not at the moment, but perhaps we can give folks a few seconds to find the raise hand button if they would like to comment. You can find that either by clicking the participants button in your control bar. Some folks may need to click the reactions tab. Some mobile users, I think, may need to click the more button to find the raise hand feature. And if all of that fails you, you can send a message via chat to let us know you'd like to comment. And I don't see any hands shooting up at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now turn back to council for final comments, if any, on the Public Works Administration budget. Okay, I think without comments, we are ready to consider due pass for this budget. I'll call the roll. Council Member Sandberg?
Yes.
Council Member Scambalori?
Yes.
Council Member Rallo?
Yes.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty?
Yes.
Councilmember Volan?
Yes.
Councilmember Sims?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
And I will also vote yes, so that is 9 yes votes and 0, 0. Okay, wonderful. Rolling on through, we've got animal control up next, and tonight with us we have Mr. Wason to present. I don't know if you have anyone else with you, but feel free to.
Yeah, it'll be me all night. I'll have all the division heads and some of their staff present as well to answer questions. I will be doing all the presentations. If we can make sure that all of them do receive a do pass recommendation of 9-0 like the last one, that would be fantastic. And we can go from there. But Animal Care and Control Division is a division of the Department of Public Works, and all right. Responsible for addressing and responding to all companion animal needs in the community. I think I've stated this every year since becoming the Public Works Director, that Animal Care and Control has a group of passionate and dedicated employees like no other. These staff members have turned on a dime during the pandemic to continue to offer all of their services safely during COVID, while also administering the same levels of care and compassion as they've always done. Just over 18 full-time equivalents. 2020 intake numbers and service calls have remained steady. Staff has stepped up in such huge ways, given the major reduction of in-person volunteer hours at the shelter due to COVID-19 impacts. Staff is still taking on big projects, modifying services, building community partnerships to impact the overall animal welfare of the community. A few highlights include increasing post-adoption and pre-surrender support programs, formalizing a contracted veterinary service for on-site care, and continuing to work with the Animal Care and Control Commission in their efforts at producing a wildlife management report for the council. While we haven't made quite the progress on that report as we'd hoped to so far in 2021, there have been some significant activities in that regard. Back in April, we did get to work with the Control Commission and an agreement that we'd work in partnership with them on such a wildlife management report. They began with some peer community research and trying to look at what other peer communities are doing with these efforts. We've been developing and beginning to put nuisance wildlife fact sheets on our website, which is ongoing. We've launched a new feature in the U-Report system specifically for wildlife issues back in June. And they are continuing to finalize a dedicated wildlife conflict education and resource page on the website. So, so we're not quite at a final report on wildlife management for the community in terms of our initial efforts. We are actively working on that project. I'd also note in that regard that I'm not sure why, and if we have anything to explain it specifically, but we've had a 36% decrease in deer-related calls in the first half of 2021 compared to the same time in 2020. I thought it would have gone up with the number of people at home, but it's gone down. So moving right along, with our animal shelter operations, obviously one of our main goals and the metric that most everyone's going to be most interested in is our live release rate. That's our rate of animals that either return to homes via our adoption programs, our owner reunification programs and such. And I'm happy to report that our mid-year live release rate is at 95%. I talked about volunteer hours and the major reductions there. We're not going to come even close to meeting our 2021 goal of 11,500 hours. I think we were being quite optimistic during that period of COVID, and we're just not at a point where we can welcome back the volume of volunteers that we have in the past. In terms of our 2022 budget goals and our animal shelter operations, again, we're going to strive to reach the highest levels with our live release rate, and then also increase the percentage of animals that move through the foster homes more quickly. As you know, both city and county operations are based on animal control operations are based out of our facility on South Walnut Street, and just in general, our efforts are always striving to meet national standards according to the Humane Association and ASPCA. For 2022, we are hopeful to start returning back towards some more traditional volunteer hours. Hopefully we're trending in that direction through the end of 2021, and that we start to see our COVID numbers improve as well to actually be able to meet that goal. We rely on our volunteers for so much at the shelter. And, when I mentioned the amount of, staff has really had to step up and fill all those roles. And it's been really amazing to watch that happen. They're working harder than ever down there. It's never not stressful at the shelter, but at the same time, just major kudos to their efforts given the amount of reduction in volunteer efforts over the last year. We're going to continue our humane education and public relations. This is our outreach efforts, our communication efforts, and all the behavioral support efforts that we do beyond just the initial adoption. This is really important and helps to keep adopted animals in the home of their adopters long into the future. We also, one of the biggest things we do and one of the most important things we do are animal control field operations. These are our officers that are out on the streets, working on everything from bite cases to, wildlife or animal endangerment to, emergency call outs, et cetera. And just they do an amazing job with all the things that they're responsible for, working very closely with Bloomington Police Department, amongst many other local public safety agencies. In 2022, we are looking forward to getting all three of our officers trained through the National Animal Control Association. We were hopeful to achieve that in 2021, but some COVID delays and training opportunities were limited there. Overall budget highlights include, you'll hear this throughout the evening, but most all of our budgets are going to be pretty steady year to year. We're not asking for any major increases. We're not, we're recognizing the sign of times and trying to be frugal in our efforts and not and keep things pretty steady year to year. This budget reflects that as well. I would highlight our biggest increase is in our spay neuter surgery fees. There's been some pretty major changes with what's the name of the Pets Alive group that did a lot of that in the community. So having some additional costs there. Overall, the category 1 personnel expenses are in line with just typical the bonuses and the raises as proposed by the mayor's office. So the overall budget request for animal care and control is $1.775 million. Just about a 2% change, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wason, for that presentation. We will open it up to council member questions. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I had to unmute myself. Thank you, Mr. Wason, for your presentation. And I got a couple questions, and we got 3 minutes, so let's do this thing. First of all, I also want to recognize the dedicated and passionate members that you have on the Animal Care and Control Commission. I talked with many of them, and I just wanted to say that there. And I don't know if I'd like to know your feelings on this, or maybe Mr. Souders. But where are we, or what are your feelings with regard to addressing puppy mill operations and any potential legislation that may come down the pike there? Do you have a position one way or another?
I'll start, and Virgil, you feel free to jump in. First, foremost, completely against puppy mills. To my knowledge, we have none that exist in Bloomington, and our control officers, if they ever came upon one, would take immediate swift action as they would for the welfare of the animals. In terms of the proposed ordinance that I've seen over the last year or so, I don't know if that I've got a specific opinion on that. We have 2 pet shops that would specifically target, and I don't know that at this time I'd offer one way or the other to the council on that specific legislation. We inspect both of those facilities. We have good working relationships with both of those businesses and do our regular inspections and find them to be in compliance.
Okay, thank you. Even with regard to their supply and where they come from?
So, and I won't act like that I'm overly knowledgeable. I do know we have requirements that they provide us documentation. Virgil, actually, you jump in here, please. Don't let me screw this up. Can you explain what our requirements are for where the animals are, the reporting requirements of the stores? Go ahead.
Yeah, so Virgil Souter, Director of Animal Care and Control. According to the ordinance, they are required to list the breeder that they came from on the kennel door. So when we inspect, we look for that and also the condition of the dogs. So when we're doing inspections and permitting the local pet stores, we're looking at the condition at the time that they are there. We don't deal with the previous other than they're supposed to be providing accurate information where they came from.
Okay, thank you. I'm almost out of time. Sounds like there'll be some more research in that area as we move forward. I'm almost out of time. I will save the other question for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rollo.
I'm intrigued, Mr. Wason, I'm intrigued by the wildlife management report because I really didn't know that was happening. Is there a team? Is this, does it include the topic of public health? And well, tell us a little bit about it.
Absolutely. So based on last year's budget hearings, hearing from yourself and Mr. Sims and some others, the concept and the topic of wildlife management certainly came up and was something that we were asked to explore. When I talk about a report, I guess what I don't want it to sound overly official. I don't want it to sound like we've created a task force or anything like that. We've been working with the Animal Control Commission back in the probably early spring to start identifying what we would want to even potentially see in a report like that. So that's where some initial peer community research took place to try to see what other communities are doing in this area. But it would certainly include things like public health, things like, nuisance animals, et cetera. So right now, I guess I'd just kind of call it an internal working group with commission members and staff trying to identify, what we might see in other communities that looks like a type of report we may want to produce here locally. As that would get formalized or move forward, we'd certainly involve the council and others. But I guess it's more of the front end work on something like that is where we're at.
Does it draw on the Deer Task Force report? And does it describe management options?
We have not gotten that far into, I recognize all the work that's been done by the Deer Task Force in the past. That is not going to be our specific focus, knowing how much work has been done there, but I'm sure it would address recommendations of that report when we get to a more formal point. Virgil, is that a fair representation is that how you would represent that?
That is how I would say it. It's well said.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm very interested to see what's produced from that. I think that do you anticipate that this group, will continue working on it, since it's a continual? This is sort of a maintenance issue in terms of community.
I think our intent was to kind of begin the process of trying to understand what it looks like for our community, what it would look like from an animal care and control division perspective, what it would look like with the Animal Care and Control Commission. We know there's, lots of hot topic issues there, a lot of hot button issues, a lot of varying viewpoints on how to manage different things. I think we would look at what are other communities doing really well in that regard? What can we do to not recreate the wheel? How can we, provide good information to the community on wildlife management. And Do I want to jump back into the fray of the deer task force? Probably not, but we know that's a really important topic in the community, and a lot of people have a lot of viewpoints on that.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Other council member questions? Anyone else with the first round? Okay, Councilmember Scandalari.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm interested in the percentage of animals. Some of your goals center around the percentage of animals that move through foster homes. What determines, so an animal comes into the shelter, what determines whether or not they get fostered, placed in a foster home or not? How does that process work?
Virgil.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Largely we look at how that animal is going to house in the shelter and how quickly it's going to move through the shelter to adoption. So the ones that are going to sit in the shelter longer have priority to foster homes. Those that are medically fragile, so those that are young neonatals or are going to take longer treatment, those are our priorities to move in foster home. Other than at that point, then the second level is when the shelter gets full and at capacity, we tend to grow our foster program to just increase our capacity for care for the most animals possible.
Got it. Thank you. And I am thrilled to see the live release rate at 95%. I'm curious, how does that compare to some of our peers in the region? That has to be at the top or near the top.
Yeah, we are definitely at the top for what's considered as far as what's considered a good effective shelter. Anything with a 10% euthanasia rate, so the 90% live release rate or up, is considered a well-run shelter in the field.
Great, good work, thank you.
Other questions from council members? First round, I think, well, Councilmember Sims, you have a second round question, I think. Do you want to go ahead?
Actually, thank you. Councilmember Rollo got started on that, but more specifically for me, with regard to the wildlife management report, and I appreciate that it's in its infancy and you're just kind of getting started, but do you have any idea of a target date or time frame of completion of this report?
Well, and I guess and that's where I want to be careful. I don't want it to sound like it's going to just be a multi-chapter report on all things wildlife management. If that's what the council and the control commission want us to head towards, I think we certainly can. I think what we're kind of trying to look at right now are the things like, wildlife nuisance or nuisance wildlife, about, public health and safety when it comes to wildlife management, and having having the ability to communicate that information, kind of market that information to the community. And and Virgil, feel free to jump in here, but I think we could use some guidance from the council or the administration on exactly what we want that to look like. Again, the Deer Task Force produced a lengthy report that we're all familiar with. So I think we're looking at it from kind of the public health and safety aspects of things regarding wildlife management, and then, the nuisance wildlife aspects. Virgil, if you have anything else to add.
I don't have anything else. That's pretty much where we're at, looking at what we can do as an animal control agency addressing those issues, and also just education seems to be the gap that we've come across in these early stages.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate that. And what I'm getting at in your budget highlight for 2022, you used the word finalize a wildlife management report.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of all I'm getting at. I just want to see at some point, whatever it is that you guys have worked on.
Sure.
Then I think it'll be easier or maybe better for the community then to have some more input, specifically with urban animal control and that sort of thing. But I think it's kind of paramount that we see since you already started, I know it's in infancy and you've indicated a finalization.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm getting at. No problems either way. I just want to keep this on the front burner.
Yeah, and I think just to finalize my thoughts on it, I think those two specific areas are where we will provide some level of a memo or a report to the council and the administration, nuisance, wildlife, public health and safety when it comes to wildlife management. So yes, sir, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Other council member questions? Okay, I think now we can turn to the public, see if there's anyone out there who would like to comment on the animal control budget. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone so far?
I don't see any hands raised at the moment, but perhaps we can give folks a few seconds to do so if they would like to speak. Not sure how many new folks have joined the meeting, so I won't repeat all the instructions on how to raise hands. If you're not able to find that button, please send a message via chat to let us know you'd like to comment. And I don't see any hands going up.
Okay, thank you very much. We will come back to council for any other questions. Okay, final comments, Council Member Rollo.
Mine is a comment. Mr. Wason, thank you for the report, and Mr. Souter. I'm really intrigued, and actually it's music to my ears to hear about a wildlife management report, even if it is, just a framework. The council has gotten reports, and we've been wanting to take action. On the one hand, we have reports of vigilantes in the community who are carelessly shooting deer and leaving arrows in them, which is very cruel. I've had reports of poisoning, and then on the other hand, we've had reports of deer attacks on dogs, and so the deer density issue is not going away; it's still there. And in the last few years, there's been a lot of things that really are quite different, or would add to the Deer Task Force report, which is now becoming antiquated. Really, the Ball State study, I think, indicates, among other things, that we have sort of an island population of deer here, and they don't migrate very much. So that was a surprise, and what that means is that we thought we'd only have lethal options, but if we have a population that is sort of like an island system, maybe we could use birth control. And I'm sure the technology has improved tremendously in the last 10 years on that. And that would be a way to limit population without having to intervene in a lethal way. Then we got the tick-borne disease issue that's becoming more and more prevalent. And then as opposed to 10 years ago, when the only means to count them was either extrapolating by doing a transect or something, or renting a helicopter, we now have drones, so we can effectively count deer in the community and manage them, very precisely. So, anyway, my point is that there's I think the Deer Task Force is important. I think it's antiquated. I think the Ball State study has a lot to say, and I think that. I'm very enthused that you're moving forward in some way on this, because I think that it's something that will need to be addressed inevitably, because it won't go away and it may get worse. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Other council member comments? Councilmember Scandalera.
Yes. Thank you for everything you've done. I look forward to the additional work on wildlife assessments as well. Two things I want to comment on. First of all, I am so grateful for the work done by volunteers. Volunteers are relevant in many departments and play an important role, but I think that's especially true here. So I just wanted to convey my thanks to that group. I also wanted to acknowledge the good work done by animal control in the data sets they provide. In some of my constituent communications, I highlight one data set from Be Clear every month. And the one I got the most comments on was actually this one, was animal control and the adoptions. And I have residents who are eager to know the next time you adopt out an iguana. So in any event, thank you for doing that. Thank you for conveying that information. I'm happy to support the budget.
Other comments? Okay, I think we are ready to consider due pass recommendation. I will call the roll for, well, recommendation for the animal control budget. Let's see. Councilmember Sandberg?
Yes.
Councilmember Boland?
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty?
Yes.
Councilmember Rallo?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Sims?
Yes.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Scambilleri?
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. So the animal control budget due pass recommendation is 900. Thank you very much, Mr. Wason. We are ready to move into facilities.